to What the Fertility Season 3. This morning, we are sitting down with Ashley Hearing to talk about her story of embryo donation. This is actually our first episode on the podcast where we get to hear the firsthand experience of a family who chose to donate their remaining embryos. Welcome, Ashley. We are so honored to have you.
I'm excited to be on here. Thank you so much for having me.
Like Kat said, we've always had it being like the embryo adoption side of it. And so getting to see what even led you to the point of obviously embryo donation, and then just like the journey of donating your embryos and just all of the things that go with that. So we're so excited to hear it.
Well, my husband Dale and I got married in 2011. And we took a couple years to travel and kind of do the things we wanted. Between that time, I was diagnosed with PCOS. So I didn't know much about it, except it's a label and they're like, just get on birth control. Like it's fine. A lot of women have it. So it wasn't until about 2013 when we started trying for kids that we realized the journey would be a little bit different for us. We tried for a little over a year on our own and had no success at all. So then we talked to my gynecologist and started like Clomid, metformin, those kind of interventions to see if that would give us a little push. It did not help at all. That's when we were referred to an infertility specialist. We went through 4 rounds of IUI. And then eventually we decided the best thing for us would be to do IVF. So we started our IVF journey. Luckily, my husband's insurance changed when we started IVF. So that process was covered because we weren't sure if that was something financially that we were going to be able to do. So that was something that helped us out a lot when we started that journey. We did the egg retrieval. They retrieved 43 eggs for me, which is like wild.
Oh my gosh.
Wild and uncomfortable. So
well, and you said you had PCOS, correct?
Right.
Okay, so that kind of sometimes goes hand in hand, but
40.
Yeah, I was sore for several days. Wasn't expecting it. Took like 2 days off work. My husband and I didn't know very many people, and we hadn't talked to anybody about IVF and what that journey would be like. And we kind of suffered in silence because we just didn't know what to do. We didn't want the questions. We were trying to navigate all this new information and find, what things worked for us without having people throw in their advice. And I think that's pretty common for a lot of families that struggle with infertility. Going back, I think I would have reached out to more communities right away. So we got 43 eggs. So I'm like, whoa, that's awesome. We're on a good start,
Yeah.
And out of the 43 eggs, they could be really selective, and they created 15 embryos.
Oh, wow. So that wasn't even like they were just like, okay, let's limit this here type thing.
Right. Yeah. They just, did the best eggs and then mixed and just found the best perfect combination apparently, and then took the best 15 embryos. I'm glad that they didn't do any more than that, because even at 15, like in our minds, we were excited that like, oh, we've got 15 chances to have a kid. And I think, we aren't educated up front about like what that means if you have a kid right away, or, you get pregnant right away. So we didn't even think about like, anything else. Like, what are we going to do with the embryos if we don't use them all? We were just like, whoo, we did it. We got 15 chances.
Yeah, you're probably thinking we're going to have to use, because you just went through 4 failed rounds of IUI. You've done the medicated cycles. And so this is definitely like, okay, hopefully 15 times we'll get one, I'm sure that was the thought process.
Yeah, it was. That's exactly what we were thinking. And we didn't really think too much into it, which is, great, because we went in there very optimistic, we're like, woo, we got this. My first IVF transfer, we got pregnant with my son. So that was amazing.
Oh, wow.
We had a little bit of like bleeding. Well, it was a lot of bleeding like week 6. And that was super scary. One thing that I didn't realize until later is that a lot of families that struggle with infertility, when they do get pregnant, there's always that gloom and doom about it's not going to last. Like, I don't deserve it. I just feel like it's not going to lead to a live birth, especially if there's any trauma that's involved. So the pregnancy was really tough mentally on me because every day I woke up like, do I still have the baby? You know, even farther along in pregnancy, it got easier and easier the longer I went. But like, is the baby kicking? You know, there are all those thoughts in the back of my head of, you know, are we going to have a child in the end of this?
Totally relate.
100%. Yep.
So to skip forward with my second IVF transfer, that failed. So we did not have, I did not get pregnant with that transfer.
And Ashley, when did you start trying again? I think that could be a whole episode, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah, I know. So in my mind and my husband's mind, when we talked about things, we're like, oh, we want like a boy and a girl. And we want them close together in age. So I wanted to try as soon as possible because I'm like, you know, we've got all this time, but you know, every year passes by, I get older, you know, I want to be able to make up for lost time, so to speak, in our minds. And so at 6 months, I think, is when I was allowed to start trying again with the clinic I was in. So you have to stop breastfeeding. So I would have wanted to breastfeed for a full year, but because of this, I'm like, okay, stop breastfeeding, do all the things. Then you have to wait a month and then start the medication. So it was probably around 7 months postpartum when I went through the second IVF.
Wow.
It was
Oh my
very
God.
quick.
I couldn't even like survive as a normal human. Postpartum.
Literally, I was like drowning. I could not imagine.
And I'm sure maybe that had a part of the outcome was because I was probably pretty drained.
Yeah.
You know, you don't sleep much, you just never know. So
Right.
but I just felt like, okay, like we're ready, we want to do that again. And that failed. Of course, we were heartbroken, but we knew like we had other opportunities. So as soon as like the next month rolled around, I was like, we're gonna do the third round of IVF. And so at that point, met with my doctor. They were like, okay, well, that was failed. Like, let's look into it just to see what's going on. I had to do a small procedure for endometriosis. So really small. There's like, yeah, you know, that might have caused it. So we'll go in and we'll just do that. And so they did that small procedure. And then the following month, I started the medication for the third transfer. The day of that transfer that I was supposed to go in, I called them because I was sick. And this is 2019. So I think it might have been a little different than what you hit 2020. So right. In 2019, I called and I was like, I'm not feeling the best. Like, I feel like I'm getting a fever. Like, should we postpone it? My doctor's like, you know, I would recommend postponing it, but it's whatever you're comfortable with. And like, something in me was like, do it. Like, you need to do it today. So I was like, okay, like, I don't feel great. Like but something in me said to just go and do that third transfer. So I did, and I got pregnant, and that resulted in our daughter, Alexia, that was born in May 2020.
Oh my goodness. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's amazing.
I feel like I've just, my mouth's been on the floor, and I feel like this is a perfect time to just share that Ashley and I matched 2 years ago, was it?
Yeah.
2 years ago, she had, I don't know, you share, you found me and you really offered to start having conversations for donating the remaining of your embryos.
Yeah. So it's really cool that it's come full circle and we can reconnect now that we have both have, you know, kids and family, and it's, yeah.
I'm just listening. Yeah. I'm listening to your story and I'm like, I know that you have a daughter. Like, I know you just said you had a son. Obviously, when you're in that process and someone reaches out to you, like, you're going to go look at their family, and like, your children are just stunning and beautiful. And I wanted to share that now before we kind of get into the second part of your journey, because I'm going to be asking, Amanda and I are going to be asking, like, what trait, like what made you pick a family, or what made you reach out? And I just feel like it's like, I have to share that I was the recipient of that. And
I was picked.
Yeah, like, I just saw Ashley was our guest today. I didn't put two and two together. I know your Instagram handle, like, by heart, but we just jumped on and I just found this out like 15 minutes.
I know, what a shocker. You're like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, but this story, I'm
Next time.
super obviously like, this is just wild. Okay, so you had your daughter, and at this point, were you and
Yeah.
your husband like, we're gonna try for a third, or you're like, we want 2 children?
No, like from the very beginning, like in our heads, we're like, we want a boy and girl close in age. My kids are 23 months apart. So like fate took us a long way to get there, but I'm like, this is what our family felt complete. And that's the only way I can like explain it. But like I couldn't picture us with another kid. Like I felt like our family was complete. But here we are with, you know, 12 other embryos, and we're like, okay, well, you know, do we pay forever? Just, you know, what if something happens? Like there was a lot of questions that even when I reached out to our clinic and stuff, they would say things like, well, what if something happens to one of your kids? And it really like made you think about things, but then you're also like, well, what if you didn't have embryos, you know, like,
Yeah.
So what was that time frame, I guess, from like having your daughter to even thinking about the additional embryos? Was it almost immediate, or
yes, it was almost immediate that we started thinking about that. I'm very like proactive with things, if you know anything about me. And so like immediately I'm like, oh my gosh, we have these 12 embryos, you know, we're paying for storage, you know, what are we going to do? What are our options? And I had no idea what the options were for that. So when I contacted the clinic, they're like, oh, you can, you know, donate them to science, discard them, or donate them. And my clinics only had the process of donating them to somebody else in the clinic. And it was, I think they had just had some kind of more anonymous paperwork that was a closed donation.
That's really limiting on like who your biological.
Yeah. And I think
it has to be somebody specific in this.
Yeah.
And I think Nebraska is just so far behind, and probably still is, with like embryo donations and just education about it. And it just wasn't something that families were thinking about. Or so it seems, because my clinic was very open to the process that I chose, which I'll kind of dive into too. So we first started, my husband and I decided like, we want to donate the embryos. We actually did some therapy and with a psychologist that specialized in like infertility and third-party donations, and we really wanted to just, you know, be 100% on board. I felt like I was at first. My husband's like, what does that mean for us, you know? So he had more questions about like, what if they come knocking at our door, you know? It's just, you know, more of a male mindset of like, oh, what happens, like what would we do, like. So we came to the conclusion that a semi-open adoption, which technically they call it a donation, would be the best outcome for our family. And the main reason for that was we would never want like a time where our 2 kids were wondering or didn't know, like we didn't want a time where our 2 kids felt like, oh, they had this secret from us, and we didn't want to have to tell them this secret. We always wanted it to be part of their story, and for them to know that they have biological siblings out there, and if they wanted to chat with them or meet up with them, then that's not off the table. And that it's not a big secret in our family. And one day I have to sit them down and be like, oh, you all have 5 siblings, you know, or 12 siblings, you know. So that was very important to us. And that's what really steered our direction into like a semi-open donation process.
Yeah.
So at that point,
I was going to say, that's what Amanda, I don't know how much.
Literally my life right now.
Story,
oh, really?
That is my so life. They have semi.
Yes. So I'm in a fully semi, well, I feel like
cool, right?
We're just fully open, honestly. But we see them once a year. Because so I'm on the recipient side of it.
Yeah.
So we get to see his like biological siblings and our like donors and everything. So yeah, we're super
so
seeing on this side, like I'm so excited to hear just like how you just even decided to choose families and like all of this. I don't know, this is so cool for me, just seeing both perspectives of it. I'm really excited just to hear more. So please continue.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. I totally advocate for like semi-open or open donations, because it's just really cool with siblings and being able to see them grow. But so then we're like, okay, how do we get to this process? The only thing we knew about was like agencies. So we started out by joining an agency, and we started the process. Like, I made my profile, I went through all the initial calls. At first they're like, we like to make sure that, because at this point my daughter was like 6 or 7 months old. They're like, we usually, or maybe earlier, it might have been like 5 months old, because she's like, I can't believe you're contacting me and your daughter's not even 6 months old. We usually like to make sure that donor families are like
100%.
have their kids are at least 1 year old. And I'm like,
Right.
no, like, I know this is what we want to do. I want to get the process started. I just didn't want to delay things, because I didn't want like 20 years from now, like our embryo, like people to be having babies. That was just seems like a long span for me.
Yeah,
So I'm like,
that
oh.
makes sense.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
something that like I didn't think about. Yeah, like if you're gonna donate the embryos, you would want the children somewhat within like a
Age.
living like age range with your children. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So we joined the agency, and then as time went on and the things we were doing, especially once we got into the second process of like, they had all of our paperwork, we started talking, they started saying like, oh, you might not match for like a year or like 2 years. And I'm like, oh no, like that's just like a long time for me to be, I don't know if you'd call it anxious about it, but like that a task isn't complete. Like
What an interesting perspective, because
Yeah.
like from Amanda or my perspective that we're on the receiving side, we were like time sensitive because we wanted like to start, we were like, we want to be pregnant and we want to like have this family unit. That is, I would have never even thought that was something that would be, I guess, time sensitive for the donor.
Yeah. And like in our minds, like you had mentioned, like kids in close in age, and it just, we didn't want it, something we were doing for such a long time and just holding on to
Sure.
that. So we decided to not go that route, but not until after we found the Facebook groups. And I just at that point started like trying to find connections with other donors and the processes. And I was like, there's got to be a Facebook group about this, right? So I'm searching, and then I come upon the Facebook groups about, connecting embryo recipients and donors. And I joined 2 of those groups, and I'm like, this is a much better option for me. I like to be in control of things. They were going to hand me one profile at a time. And it's like, that makes it so much more like, am I going to get another profile? Should I just take it? And so I joined the Facebook groups. And
that makes sense. You're saying you would only get like one at a time for the agency, but through these Facebook groups, you were really in control of picking and choosing. And just so
oh, go on.
No, I was gonna say, I think this is the same group that you matched through, Amanda.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Because you sent me the Facebook, which is how I met Ashley.
I added Kat into it.
I'm listening, but I'm going back to see if I can find the DM you sent me. But
oh my gosh, I would love that. Yeah, I haven't looked at that since I sent it. So
I haven't either. You keep going. Okay, so you're in Facebook.
So at this point, I put my profile out on the groups because I'm like, I want to get as many people as possible, see who's interested. I'm thinking that's going to be like 10 people, right? It was not. Like day
hundreds.
Yes. I mean, I'm talking probably 300 to 500 people reached out on my Facebook private message.
Well,
it was overwhelming.
I was going to say, that's what deterred me a little bit as somebody trying to find a match, because everybody that had a profile out there, something like yours, like the donor, you'd see thousands of hearts and hundreds of comments, like really selling your family to this person.
It's exactly what it is.
And it was so overwhelming because I wanted to respond to every post, but I had a newborn at home, she was only like 8 months old, 7 months old at this point, 8 months old. And so I'm like, this is too much. And I never say that. I'm usually like, give it to me. I like a challenge, but it was heartbreaking because I knew when I didn't respond, these people were heartbroken, like, because I've experienced the same infertility that they've experienced. And it's really like heart-wrenching to know that, they're reaching out to me, and some would start off by like, hey, I'm really interested. Please don't ghost me, because they had been like ghosted so many times, and they would start the process and then they wouldn't get messages back. And it got to the point where I couldn't respond to everybody. I took down my profile. I took a break for like a month and I needed to regroup. I'm like, this is a lot.
Yeah,
It's a lot. I feel bad every time I would say like, oh, I don't think it's going to be a great match. Like it broke a little piece of me because I think in fertility community, we're just so connected to our experiences that it's tough to step away from that and be like, okay, like what are we looking for? And I put what I was looking for on there, but I mean,
yeah.
it was a lot.
And you're going off based off the photos people are willing to share, the photos on the site, and then just like really a write-up. And I can't imagine like trying to go through all of that to make such a big decision about placing your embryos.
Yeah,
So,
can you share a little bit? Because I just know how like mine was and what my like our donors and everything did in the process, like that they sent us through in order for them to pick us. Can you share a little bit about like that part of it, of what when you did, talk with a family, what you were looking for, or did you have them like fill out a questionnaire or like whatever your process was? Do you mind sharing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I switched my focus and I was like, I'm going to do more like intuition led choices, that's when the process really started being successful for us. When I was like, okay, I'll go through the profiles. I'm going to skip just, the ones unless like not only what they say matches with what we're looking for, but also like if I feel a connection to like what they're saying, what I'm hearing, just going through their profile pictures, like it was very like intuition led, but we did have things that we were looking for. We wanted a couple, so we weren't necessarily looking for a single parent family, and that's just because we wanted something similar to what we had, that we would want the embryos to grow up and having that opportunity to have a double parent family, because we know raising kids are hard. So props to all the single parents out there, because I could not do it.
yeah, and I found our messages, and I want to just share the first thing. So you're spot on to what you said. First of all, we talked a lot, and you use your middle name on Facebook, not your last name,
Yep.
and that's why I didn't know.
Yep, that makes sense.
Like,
yep.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know. Okay, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's exactly what you just said. You reached out to me and you said, "Hi, Catherine, your bio caught my eye, especially valuing experiences over things." And then you went on to that's exactly what you were saying. You were looking for that like intuitive connection to somebody. Wow.
Oh my gosh. I
That is so
completely
crazy.
forgot what I said, like at all. So
We talked a lot.
Oh,
My messages are
did.
like this long.
Oh my goodness, that is so wild.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Okay, keep going. Okay.
Oh my gosh, that just like makes my heart melt thinking about it.
Yeah.
So cool. So yeah, that was one thing that we were looking for. We were wanted to be very inclusive, so we weren't, thinking like, oh, we wanted one like ethnicity, or like we were open to same-sex couples, like all of that. We wanted to be inclusive in the process with that too. But it was, we wanted somebody that was like stable financially. I mean, they didn't have to, be rich or anything like that, but just like, have your own house and like be able to provide things, that there wasn't going to be a big struggle there, because that can take a toll on a family. And gosh, I can't even think about that. Oh, we were looking for somebody that didn't have any other biological kids, and that's because we were going to donate to several families, and we wanted to do 4 embryos to each couple. So we didn't X that out completely if they had other kids, but it was something that we felt would be best for the embryos. So we were looking for families like they've been trying and they haven't been able to succeed with, infertility, and we wanted to give them that opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. You had just made a note, because I think in my bio, I had just mentioned, all of our reoccurrent loss. And then we went live with an adoption agency, and that's something that you were interested in. You're like, why did your agency like fire you? And I was like, because I got pregnant again, and you're not allowed to be pregnant when you're going through adoption with this very specific agency.
Yeah. So so we kind of looked at the whole picture, but like I said, we weren't like checking a lot of boxes mostly. We were just really, it was like how we felt. And I I would be the person that would go and find these profiles. I would show them to my husband, and like we would just go by like how we felt about it, which is a weird way to look at it. But when I was trying to like go through profiles and check boxes, it just wasn't working. So then it was connecting with the possible recipients and the families that we connected to. So Kat, you were the third person that I reached out to when I did this like intuition led.
Wow, this was August 23rd of 2021, and I'm going to give you some props because you did not ghost me. We talked late into the night, like all day. Then the next day, August 24th, we talked all day. And then September, I mean, we have a lot. Like, look at this. I know people can't see, but like Amanda.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's
This
wild.
is crazy. Okay, people that aren't, okay, let's just keep getting back on track. I'm just
No,
still.
I love that. Yeah, it's a good
blown.
reminder. But that's the whole thing is like if you feel the connection, you feel like my biggest fear was that we were going to find families, donate the embryos, and then they would ghost us, from our perspective. And then like our kids wouldn't have any connection, and we would feel like this void in our life of like, what's happening, what's going on, like what did we do, what did they do? So we wanted to make sure that there was like our values aligned with the families we chose, and just the expectation of like what we thought would be a good process when it comes to our kids and communication. So that was very important to us. So yeah, that's
I was the third. Where's number 1 and 2? Did you actually match with them?
So 1, we matched, and I was like, oh, this is great. We started the process. And then once we got to the legal process, there were a lot of issues that came up. They kind of kept on going back on some of the things we said. We wanted open communication in our legal agreement. We had mentioned like, we want to, have active communication, but at least like a quarterly update. Like we would love like a quarterly update. And then all of a sudden, even though we talked to them in like our Zoom meetings about that, and they were okay with it, when the legal process come, they were like, oh no, like we decided that that's too much for us. And at that point, we decided, oh, if they keep changing things that early, I mean, we went back and forth with our agreement like 5 times. And it wasn't just on the legal stuff, it was on like their preferences.
Right. And that's something I learned through my adoption process is you just need to be honest from day one, because it's not a good match. To your point, I mean, I'm glad that you and your husband were thorough enough and like just so set that this is what was going to be best for your embryos, that you didn't like waver. But we did learn that in the adoption process of like, you can't say something because you're so desperate and then go back on it. So I'm really glad you guys had a good legal team, it sounds like.
Yeah. And I just, it's embryo like agreements that are written up legally don't really have a lot of say like in court. It's basically the same agreement that you would give somebody if you were giving them a car. Like that's how far behind the process is for donor.
And yeah, I was gonna say that's because they consider embryo, and this could be changed in 2024. But when I was looking at it, and Amanda, it's considered is property, right?
Right. Yeah.
And that's why they use the word donation instead of adoption legally.
Mm-hmm.
I literally remember, oh, sorry, but I just remember recently this past visit, because our embryos and our like donor and everyone, they live in a different state than we do. And so we go to them to visit. And I literally remember exactly having this conversation with our donor. And she was like, I was just praying and hoping that everything you told me, that you guys, after you signed and got the embryos, that you guys were not going to just, you live in another state, that you were just never going to talk to us again and never actually come visit and like never have these meetings. And she was like, I just really was just banking that you were honest and going to do it. And she's like, so thank you so much that you like honestly are here and like doing it, because even though we have a legal contract, like you said, like there's truly not really anything that she could do. I mean, she could attempt to sue us, but it really doesn't go far in court.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of the last thing as donors, like we have any kind of control over. Yeah. And so the things that we put in there, we're very mindful of the recipients and like their wishes, but also at least for us, like we were very set in the things that we had already discussed. Like we wanted those included because I mean, it's just basically a promise. And so, you know,
Exactly. Yeah.
when they went back and kept changing everything, it was like, oh, okay, you're going back on the promise that
Yeah.
we had made prior to this
And a
agreement.
lifelong promise at that.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay,
That-
I've really derailed this conversation. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I could talk about this forever. I mean,
Okay, so I was your third person you reached out to. Then once you and
Yep.
I'm going through our messages, and it like we basically I think ended up getting pregnant, and you were so supportive through that process too. We ended up finding each other on Instagram. You've always been so supportive of Brooklyn, and it's been beautiful. What happened, I guess, after me? You kept reaching out to people.
Yeah. So the second couple that we matched with, they actually went through the process. They got pregnant, the first transfer,
Wow.
and they have a child that will be 1 in a couple months.
Oh my
So
goodness. So
that
sweet.
worked out just like
And did they wind up adopting the 4?
they adopted the 4 embryos. Yep.
Oh,
And what's really cool about them is we've met in person because they came here to Nebraska to do their transfer because the state that they lived in didn't allow transfer of the embryos unless we thawed them first and changed the label to their name. So
what? I've never
Yeah.
heard that. That is
yeah,
wild.
each state has different legal things. And we found that because all 3 of the couples we donated to are in different states. So that's one of the big changes that we had to do with the agreements is work with their attorneys. And that was one of the things the state wouldn't allow them to do is transfer the embryos unless they were thawed, the label was replaced, and then they were shipped. And that obviously could damage the embryos. So we both thought that was not a good idea. And so they came here, and the day before their transfer, I was able to meet them. And it was such a cool thing. We had dinner. It's so funny because we are like our families are a lot alike. So it's just a really cool experience. And they got pregnant. So and then they flew back to their state, they got transferred, they flew back to their state, they found out they were pregnant. They've kept us, in touch with everything along the way. Like on the way to the hospital, I feel like we were like getting texts like, oh, she's going into labor, all
Yeah.
And
these
that
fun things.
emotional
So,
process, like for you and your
yeah.
husband, I'm sure was just something you've never even experienced. Like that,
Yeah,
wow.
it is. And then when I connected with you, Kat, like there's just something about your profile and your words. And then when you sent me to your Instagram, it was the advocacy that you had for the infertility community and just seeing the love that you and your husband had for each other and your story, which was heartbreaking in itself. All of that just was so touching to me. And even though like we didn't go through the process, like it really like pulled at my heartstrings. And so, yeah, like seeing your family grow and, getting successfully pregnant and having your child, it was really a cool experience to see like that outcome for you. So thank you for being open and sharing all of that.
Thank you.
To
This
the
is
world.
honestly like, I just looked at my phone. Amanda texted me earlier in the intro. She goes, "Are you okay?" Everybody like that hears the first half of this is going to be like, I literally just started rambling. Like, this is the first time we've seen each other face to face. And I feel like when you were first sharing your story, I'm just taking it all in. Because to your point about the couple you did match with, really just like 2 women and how really similar they end up being. Like, I'm just listening to everything you're saying. And I'm like, I would have been so honored to have been a recipient of you and your husband's embryos because this is just wild. I don't even know what else to say.
I know.
Not me getting
It's such a shock.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. This is just so insane. And you are such an incredible human being I'm listening to you say how difficult it was for you to donate your embryos. And that's not something that you had to do. And you continue to go through that process. And it wasn't just a very simple, here's this person, here's 12 embryos, I'm going to sign on a dotted line. Like, you guys did work for this,
You were
end up
intentional about it. Yeah.
beautifully.
It is, yeah, it definitely is a process, but we felt like mission driven to do it. Like this is what we wanted to do, but going into it, we did not know anything. And I think with infertility in itself, we have to be our own advocates and our own researchers. And I feel like anybody that's gone through infertility should get a honorary MD because it's just crazy. Like the things we go through to like research and find out and learn medical things. And there's no like quick course on learning how to navigate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now you have one family that you adopt or you donated the 4 to, and so now you
Mhm.
still have what? I can't do math.
8.
Remaining embryos
Yeah.
left.
Yep. So while I was speaking with Kat, we had connected to another family for the second or third because we weren't sure what direction you all were going to go with for the embryo donation, and fell in love with them like right away. We're like, oh my gosh, this is great. Similar story. We felt that connection, and they got our next 4 set of embryos. They were at a state where the embryos were shipped from our center to their center. And during this process, I think I mentioned before about my clinic had never experienced this. They also had to meet with their attorneys and come up with new paperwork just for me and my husband to be able to do this. Like they were constantly meeting with attorneys. They were asking us questions to learn from us about how they can do this process in the future. So not only like were we learning things, our clinic, who was a very big clinic in our town, has now like started the process of being able to do this in the future too. And I thought that was really cool. So
That's so beautiful. You're pioneering like embryo donation and like setting the path for other women that come behind you to make it easier for them, that they're not having to go through everything that you and your husband went through.
I hope so. And they were wonderful to work with. So I still keep in touch with the third party reproductive specialists there and everything. And it was really cool to experience it all. It was work, like you said, but it was a really cool experience just to learn everything and be able to share that information places like here.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my goodness.
So after the second couple, then we're like, okay, like we found another couple and we like fell in love with them. They were ready to like get the ball rolling right away. Like they had like 0 changes to our agreement except for like a couple state things. I mean, we're all on the same page. And one of the big things about the couples that we matched with and donated the embryos to is they were all had the same mindset of like, there can never be too many people that love a child.
Right.
And I love that. One of my couples, the first couple we donated to specifically said that to us. And that's something that like I say now, because I'm like, that is so beautifully said, because it's so true in any instance. Like, why take that away from a child if somebody else is going to love them, even if it is from afar?
Yeah, that's the same type of verbiage that I kind of came to understand during the adoption process. Like that's just one more, especially the open adoption process. It's just one more person to love on that child. And how is that a negative thing?
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And it's just such a beautiful thing. So, I mean, from the get-go, I mean, my son was 2 when we started donating embryos. So I mean, he's always been part of our journey, and like I've told him about it in like so many words. And as he's gotten older, now he's 5, and like we still talk about it. He knows that he was created in a petri dish. Like that's just all part of his story, which might be different, but also might be similar to kids that
Oh yeah,
that
now.
he has.
I mean, gosh, we have what, 77 episodes just on our little show, and most of it's IVF. Like there's so many women that this is their only option to having children.
Right. Yeah. And like there's just so much, like the couples that we chose are just, we have so much gratitude for them. I mean, their families, and for them trusting the process and for us trusting the process and the relationships we built because of that. We started out as like a semi-open adoption or donation, and it's open because we are connected on social media. Like they share tons of pictures with me, like I'd mentioned when one of them was going into labor, like we got updates, we got like probably one of the first people that got the birth pictures. Like, it's been such a beautiful relationship. There's have been 2 kids born of the embryos so far. One of the families is having a harder time getting pregnant. So my heart goes out to them, of course, and that's, you know, a hard thing. But the other 2 couples have both had kids. And recently, one of them just turned a year old, and then the other will be 1 soon. So it's just really cool to see and see the similarities and the differences with, you know, their biological siblings, which are my kids.
So obviously being on the recipient side. So, and I know a lot of people so both people who donate, so you, and then people who are the recipient, so like me, my biggest fear, so like people that then are going through embryo adoption and looking for families to match with and all that. My biggest fear with one and open, which obviously now we have, and it's beautiful and it's totally not what my fear was at all, but was that like you technically, of course, are the biological mom.
Mm-hmm.
And so like this connection, and I was like so fearful that there would just be, especially if it was open, that like my child would see you and then I would like, they'd be like, oh my gosh, this is my mom, and like have this connection. And there was just such a fear in it for me that you would just like be so, and I'm saying you, but you know what I mean? Like
Right, yeah.
the donor, that there would just be like this like not weird connection, but just like this instant connection that I just don't have or something. And I think a lot of people probably feel that same way. And then to the other side of it, I'm sure before you have actually donated, and I may be wrong, so totally tell me that like, I know I've talked to my sister-in-law about it. She's going through IVF and she's like, I don't know if I could donate my embryos because that's my children out there. And so like, I'm curious just to hear your thoughts and how you process that. I don't know.
Yeah. And I mean, the same fears that you have are also fears as donors that we have, because we haven't experienced that, right? So it would be naive of us to say, like, oh, when I see the child, I'm not going to think anything of it. So it's that kind of that you're going into it blind, like, you know, I'm not sure what it's going to be like, but I encourage individuals to make decisions about like embryos based on their own journey, speak with, you know, a professional, mental health professional, and to follow your heart when it comes to that. And we really dove into, my husband and I, on like, what would that be like? What would it be like if we met them in person? What would it be like, you know, if we heard something bad happen to them? Like, what would it be like if none of them worked out and they, you know, none of them turned into babies and none of the couples got pregnant? So we had to really dive into that to like kind of mock experience what that would be like. And so there was no way to know until it happened. And following your heart and like what you believe you should do is the best thing. There's not a like, not everybody should donate their embryos, you know. It's you should do that based on how you feel about it, and do a little work into digging into how you would feel with each situation. And so that's what we did. And we spoke to a mental health professional and we really dove into those kind of things. And she's like, oh yeah, you all are ready. Like, we knew that's what we wanted to do. But then, you know, you see your embryos turn into a baby and then you're like, oh, they look like my son. But as it's been like a year after the first baby has been born, I have love for the embryos that have now turned into babies. They biologically, like, they look a lot like me or my husband or our son or our daughter. Like, there's those similarities and it's just so cool. But it feels to me like what we did was always how it was supposed to be. So even though we biologically made the kids, I feel like they never belonged to us. And that's sounds weird unless you've experienced it, but seeing those
I'm literally crying.
Seeing those families love their kids, like that is what makes me emotional, is like, wow, that baby is so loved. Wow, I'm glad we gave a chance of life for that child, because they are loved and they're cared for. And that makes me cry, not me thinking, and I have never had the thought of, I wish I could take that baby back because I can see the love that goes into their parenting.
Literally, you just rocked my world. Okay. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, this is
Yeah. And I get emotional thinking about like the love that I see between the couples and their child. And it's really, that's what makes the process so amazing for me in doing a semi-open or open donation, is being able to experience that. And so we don't have any regrets. My husband and I do not have any regrets at all.
I know Amanda had a lot of questions, but I don't know if you can ask it.
Oh God, literally, you just explained it so beautifully, and
Oh.
I know that my story is so similar to how our donors feel, and she's literally said so many similar things, and just to hear you say that, like, this is the real reason why, like, I'm so happy you're on to share your journey and just tell like more people about how amazing embryo donation can be, because I think a lot of people are scared to do it because they don't know, like you said, it's an unknown and you don't know how you're gonna feel, but just seeing that, and at the end of the day, it's like you said, like more people to love this child, and that's all you can ever want, is for a child to feel so loved. And so gosh, I'm just so thankful you were on to share this. And oh, it just made me feel so good too from like the other side. Oh my gosh. I don't know.
I'm so thankful you all had me. It's been a long time coming, but I'm glad
It
it's kind of a
has.
surprise too. That's kind of a
Yeah.
cool
I know you're
surprise.
like, when we started, I'm like, hey, Ashley, I'm Kat. You're like, yeah, I know you dumb. So dumb. Yeah, of course I know who you are. Oh my gosh. Well,
That
thank
is
you
so
so much. This is personally my favorite episode we've ever done. I'm very, very thankful that you wanted to connect and get on the show and share your experience.
Absolutely. It's been a blessing to be on here, and I appreciate you all and what you're doing for the infertility community. You all are rocking it and spreading awareness. So thank you so much. And thank you for allowing me to be part of that.
Thanks, Ashley.